Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. Today's episode started out as an email written by Billie Smith, who's a yoga teacher. Billie shared some really powerful words, and when I read it, I immediately replied to that email asking if Billie might consider sharing it as a podcast episode. And I'm thrilled that they even considered my suggestion and then went ahead and made a podcast episode with this. And then even more thrilled that Billie gave me permission to share that audio with all of you. So before I get into things further, in case you are new here, let me introduce myself and the podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this podcast is being recorded on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people who were here on Turtle Island long before my settler ancestors arrived. It's really important to me that I continue to learn to stay connected to the earth and the people who've been caring for this land for generations. And it's also super important to me to learn about my own ancestors who had earth-based practices long ago. I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, a mom of 3, an entrepreneur, and a forever student who loves to ask questions, maybe too many questions sometimes. But I think that's why podcasting feels like a good fit. I just am so grateful that we have this time to hang out together and learn from some amazing individuals on this podcast, like Billie. This podcast was inspired by me understanding what it feels like to leave a yoga teacher training and feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here in this real world of running a business, continuing to figure out what is my yoga as that evolved and as I learned more and more. And I really thought, wouldn't it be amazing if yoga teachers have a place where they can connect to other yoga teachers, so a supportive community, while also hearing ideas and information. So the main goal of the podcast for the last 7 years now is so that you have a place where you feel supported. Today's episode with Billie is one that I found to be so supportive. So I wanted to share it with you in case you've been struggling to write an email or create a social media post or put a video or a podcast together, whatever content you create. In the moment where that gets really tough, I think this episode is helpful. Returning listeners, thank you for coming back and hanging out yet again. That means the world to me. Today's episode is powered by Pelvic Health Professionals, and this is a place where we learn the most up-to-date information about pelvic health so we can help our yoga students who are dealing with some very common health issues along with normal life changes. In that membership in Pelvic Health Professionals, we've recently added yoga to the mix so that you can learn and be the student in a yoga series. And then if you are a yoga teacher, you can share what you learn in your group or one-on-one classes. Our latest yoga series is called Nourish Your Nervous System. It's being hosted by Kathleen Pratt, who's a social worker and yoga teacher. Kathleen specializes in pelvic health, trauma, pain, and the nervous system. So if you want to check this out, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. You can sign up there for this yoga series and then also get access to all of the other yoga classes, workshops, and guest expert calls we've done over the years. Also, today's episode is inspired by the work that Billie Smith is doing. Billie is not only our podcast guest today, but I also want to give a shout out to tell you, head on over to Billie's website. Visit Move with Billie. Billie is spelled Billie, movewithbillie.com. And Billie shares a yoga practice that is inclusive and anti-diet, and there's a free one there for you. And especially if you have listened to today's episode and then you think, wow, I really want to hear more from Billie, check out their podcast, get on their email list, and go sign up and show some support. Maybe start following them on social media. We'll make sure that all of those links are in our show notes for today's episode. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/369. So this episode is here for you. If you've ever sat staring at a blinking cursor, wondering how you're going to write an email or a social media post or blog post, or how you're going to create some video content, especially when things are happening in your personal life or in the world, things that feel very important to talk about in that moment. This episode was created because of that exact moment when Billie Smith was struggling to write an email to their yoga students. Billie is not your typical yoga and movement teacher. They are a queer advocate, trauma, abuse, and eating disorder survivor. And Billie is shaking up the status quo and challenging conventional narratives in the wellness industry. They believe in discarding harmful ideologies like diet culture and spiritual bypassing, and instead, they're dedicated to creating spaces where individuals can be their authentic selves, free from judgment and expectation. Billie's approach to movement is all about empowerment, helping students tune into how they feel rather than how they look. With over 600 hours of training and a commitment to inclusivity, Billie's classes, workshops, and one-on-one sessions provide a safe space for those seeking to reclaim their bodies and their narratives. So whether you're looking to break free from societal constraints, increase your mobility or your strength, or simply feel more at home in your body, Billie is here to guide you through the journey with compassion and authenticity. Here's the podcast that Billie shared as an email when they had so many topics they wanted to cover, but couldn't do that without first talking about a topic that was weighing heavy on their heart in that moment.
Hey, welcome back to Rebel Movement Podcast. My name is Billie. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her. I'm doing something a little bit different today, not something I have ever done before, and I don't know if I ever will do it again or not, but I'm going to read through and talk about a newsletter that I sent on the 14th of February. And if you want to subscribe to my newsletter to get stuff like this in your inbox, there'll be a link in the show notes, or you can go to my website, movewithbillie.com, and there's a pop-up that comes up on the screen. So I put this newsletter out last week, and I sent it to a friend of mine named Shannon, who I was on the podcast, and Shannon said that I should record it as an episode of my podcast, which I've never done before, but considering the response I got from her and a couple of other folks, I thought it was important. And yeah, so I'm going to read it out to you, and I will talk a little bit about it after. But yeah, I'm just going to go right into it. I've been having a really hard time knowing what to say in my email this week. Not because I don't have ideas. I've had several and even wrote a few drafts of the emails. They all felt inauthentic. Not because I don't believe the words I'm saying, but because my heart right now isn't fully in it. It's hard to know what to say in a newsletter when each day we wake up to more news from Gaza, of more children without families facing things they should never even have to know exist in the world yet. They should be playing and upset that their siblings have a slightly different toy than them. They shouldn't need to face a genocide. They shouldn't even know it exists. It's not that I think what I have to say is unimportant. It's that my heart right now feels too heavy, and it feels really hard to find the right words this week, especially as folks who were told they were in the last safe zone in Gaza are now being bombed. It's also hard to know what to say because we're complicated humans. We are seeing this genocide on our phone screens, but we still have to live our regular lives and we have to contend with that. I'm adjusting to a move, building a house, running a business, doing intensive trauma healing, adjusting to being a more involved step parent, having my stepkids live with me more for the first time, are living with me for the first time. I'm doing my best to help them through the move and be there for them as much as I can for their difficult moments and support them. So I started a newsletter on Monday about what weight inclusivity means, and then I deleted it. I started a couple of times a newsletter on Tuesday about tokenism and congruency, and I deleted all of those. So this morning, the Wednesday, I thought, fuck it. I'm going to write about this whole process and get to those topics later because I need you to know that what's going on in Gaza isn't normal. It shouldn't be normal. It should affect us. It should enrage us. It should disgust us. It's normal to feel helpless being so far away. But that's why we use our voice and why we donate and why we share other people's stories. That's why we have kind conversations centering the experiences of people who are living there, who are going through this. It's also normal to feel a bit at a loss for how on earth you can wake up each day hearing more information on top of everything else on your plate. It's normal to need to take more rest and more breaks so that you can come back to this work and other work with more space. It's normal to cry without knowing whether they're your tears for your grief and pain or for others. I just want to remind you that this is not an either or situation. Something I hear a lot of. It's not that their suffering is worse, therefore my suffering is invalid or your suffering is invalid or unimportant. It's that they, the people of Gaza, in Congo, and many other places in the world, are suffering. They are going through things that no one should have to go through. And you are suffering, or I am suffering, and we're facing our own shit too. Both are valid. Invalidating your own struggles is not going to give you any more energy to help change the world. It's just going to burn you out. And your feelings that you're ignoring are just going to come back you and bite you in the ass, honestly. They don't go away. As someone who has tried this in the past, I'm going to tell you with certainty that they don't just go away. So, although I have no answers, it feels more real and authentic right now and more congruent, honestly, to just tell you my experience as a human these days without needing to defend myself or prove anything to you, just being human because you have those days too. Days where the weight of the world is so great, the grief so overpowering that you just really aren't sure of your own words to express it. Although I wish you never had to go through that, the gift I can give you is the reassurance that you're not alone with it. That just because you're feeling this today, or this week, or this month, doesn't mean you always will. That although mental health stigma may fill your head with lies that you are less worthy or will be less successful if you're having a hard time, that's utter bullshit. That there are people out there who care far more about and will be far happier to support a human who is honest about the hard shit as well as the good shit, who just shows up with all of it to normalize it because they care about others and they want to feel seen. Personally, if I was going to work with someone, say I was looking for a coach, I would feel way more comfortable, feel way more connected to someone who's going to be honest about life's shit days. I immediately feel invalidated and uncomfortable around people who only talk about the love and light and choose happiness. They can they can just keep their spiritual bypassing to themselves. It's not for me. Life is not like that, and I have no space or time to support people who are going to lie about it and make themselves look better or more credible in quotes or better than others. I think honestly those days in marketing are over anyway. So there you have it. A newsletter straight from my heart. But it's interesting, as soon as I started to be frank about what I'm actually going to be what's actually going on this week, the words just flew out. When I tried to write all those other newsletters, which I am excited to share and talk about, I just stared at a blank screen for ages. Each word felt like a whole sentence. Here's to you, a wonderfully imperfect, yet absolutely fantastic human doing their best, even on the bad days, doing way better than you give yourself credit for. With love, Billie.
Connected yoga teachers, I'm popping in here for a moment to tell you about a call that we did with Mary Reddinger because it was so amazing. It was part of a guest expert call inside of Pelvic Health Professionals, our membership. You might have heard the podcast that we did with Mary back in episode 363, so not that long ago, where Mary was talking to us about how she grew her private yoga career to the point where she could support her entire family while her husband went back to school. So I'll make sure to link to that podcast episode in the show notes. But then I also wanted to share a little snippet that we did with Mary as a guest expert, because we had questions coming in from our pelvic health professionals asking how to get more one-on-one students or clients and how to market and then retain those people. So we invited Mary to come in and talk with us as our guest expert, and she shared even more in that call. So I'll share an audio snippet, and if you want to hear more, you can access that call by joining Pelvic Health Professionals. To do that, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com and click on the join button. That gets you access to every call, workshop, training, and yoga series that we've done so far. And you can also attend our live calls as well. So here's that quick snippet from Mary where she shares how she gets the bulk of her private yoga students.
Group classes is my number one way I have found private students. The second way is reaching out to complementary providers. So in my case, I'm a pre- and postnatal yoga teacher, reaching out to doulas, reaching out to midwives, reaching out to pelvic floor physical therapists or occupational therapists. Reaching out, introducing myself if I didn't know them already, and offering them a complimentary private session. And if they like it, telling them I would appreciate their recommendation. I've received many students that way from referrals, mostly from pelvic floor physical therapists and occupational therapists.
Connected Yoga Teachers, this call was amazing. I highly recommend joining Pelvic Health Professionals so that you can watch or listen to the full call. And Mary also sent along a very in-depth PDF that's included in the resources and notes for this call. So to access that, join us over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. When you join, you have a full month to check out the membership and soak in all the learning in there. And if it's not a good fit, you can unsubscribe at any time. And if it's the first 30 days that you've ever checked out the membership, you can also let us know if you feel like it's not a good fit and I'd like a full refund. No questions asked. We've actually never had someone do that. We have people who join the membership and learn for a month or two. We also have people who have been in there from the very beginning when we started the membership back in 2019. And so you can really decide what learning fits your time and your budget. Okay, let's dive back into Billie's podcast so we can hear their thoughts after writing this email.
That's my newsletter. Thank you for listening to it. I just think it's really important. I talked about this a little bit last week, I think, as well. Not to the same extent, but I think it's really important to talk about it because I've had conversations with quite a few people who, say they have work stress or work demands, or maybe they have kids, or their own trauma healing or their own mental health they're trying to figure out. And maybe they have interpersonal stuff or relationship stuff or family stuff or whatever. And then they are doing their best to show up and really talk about what's happening in Gaza. And they're trying to stay informed and they're trying to keep promoting other people's voices. Or there's another word for it, but that's good enough. Feeling like, how the heck do I do this all? How do I do this? How do I function normally? And that's the thing that I think is important to say and to to remind you is that there is not normal right now. This is not normal. It's not normal. It shouldn't be normal. This is not a normal situation. It's fine if it doesn't feel normal. It's fine if it feels overwhelming, if it feels like you're not really sure how the fuck to do this. That's okay. And honestly, talk to other people in your circle about it too, because I bet you they feel the same. How the fuck do you be normal with this situation going on? I don't think you can do it. And I think there's some days, like when you're going through grief, there's some days that will feel kind of normal. ish, maybe, or moments. And then out of the blue, it feels like it all hits you at once. And you're like, whoa, I can't move. Like, this is so much. Um, Often our feelings, I find anyway, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but our feelings are often waves. Um, Especially if you're doing your best to give them some space. They come up and they're really big and they're overpowering, and maybe they go right over your head and wash you away. And then there's some times where they kind of fade away a little bit. That's all normal. It's okay if you don't feel rage every single second of the day, because, like, how are you supposed to do all your stuff if you do? You know what I mean? Our brains are really good at protecting us. Um, and if you like, um, how do I say this part? So I was talking to Shannon. I don't think she'll mind me saying this part. When she sent me the message about this email, she'd said, it sounded like she said that she was sick, maybe from a kind of a, um, not a lack of balance, but just like it's struggle. It's just struggle. There's a struggle to find balance lately, right? Um, because there's, with a lot of people I know, there's lots and lots and lots of stuff happening in their personal life too. Um, And now I'm also sick, like a couple days later after having that conversation. And I don't think I also have been doing a very good job of finding balance. I've been very, very, very stressed out and overwhelmed. And maybe you are in this boat too. Maybe you feel like, wow, I haven't been finding balance. But, like, how do you find balance right now? It's, you know what I mean? Like, I just want you to know that it's totally fine if you need more rest. You resting doesn't mean you're not showing up and you're not doing everything you can. um, you resting is just something you need to do in order to be able to continue to do this work. It's also okay if you're, like, doing your best, doing all the things, and you still don't feel balanced, because that's how I felt the last couple of weeks. I feel like I was going to the gym and I was trying to take a moment to meditate, and I was trying to do all the self care apps, and I was trying to do, I was doing therapy, and I was all the things, you know what I mean? And I still felt overwhelmed and like stressed out, and I was really struggling with how I show up as a business owner, because sometimes it just doesn't feel important. Like, it is, in reality, it is important. My business is important. The work I do is important. Um, but just sometimes it's like, how do I do this when all of this other stuff is happening? And I think that's all valid. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that we're going to feel this way forever, but it's totally valid if you're like, how do I even go to work? Like, what is the, like, why? Even though, you'll still go to work and you'll still have to go, and you'll still contend with those feelings, but it's understandable that you have them in the first place. They don't mean that your work isn't important. And I would say, especially if you're doing, like, creative work, or maybe you have a business, if you've been having that feeling of, like, or you're a teacher, you've been having that feeling of, like, doubting yourself, or doubting, like, what is even the point of doing this anymore? I would just encourage you to check in with it and not take it as a sign that you're doing anything wrong in your life. Doesn't mean you've gone down the wrong career path, or that you need to close your business, or whatever. It's that the world is overwhelming and there's horrible things happening, and you are trying to juggle all the things in your life, and then, deal with having to, like, buy food and, like, clean your house and, like, get enough sleep and live in a capitalist society and live in a white supremacy society, and um, deal with all the anti-fat bias and the sexism and um, racism, that is, all of that is systemically built in our society. And then you're also contending with and being aware of and doing the work of um, talking about what's happening in Gaza. And that's like, that's a lot to say. I, like, almost forgot what I was saying in the middle of that sentence. It was so long. Um, and the other thing I want to talk about too, and this doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but I mean, actually, I feel like it probably does, just in slightly different ways. If you have a business or a platform, and you are right now using it to talk about Gaza, doesn't have to be all the time Gaza, or all the time talking about Palestine, but you're using it to talk about it. Um, I wish it wasn't, but it's a risk right now. I hate that. I hate that it is. Um, but the unfortunate reality is that it is. That social media platforms are blocking or I don't know any of the technical terms, but you know, what is it called, shadow banning, or like not promoting or discouraging, I will say discouraging posts that are pro Palestine. And there is a lot of um division in some respects and propaganda, and um it can feel, honestly it shouldn't, but it can feel kind of vulnerable and um difficult to share about it on your platform, or maybe with people in real life. um and it shouldn't be a risk. We should be standing up, because there is no excuse for, I can't even give you an updated number of the amount of people who've been murdered in Palestine, because it's going up every day. But there's no there's no like rational reason behind it. There's no good reason that that many people should have been murdered. Um, and it shouldn't be a risk to talk about it. It should not be a risk to post about it on social media, but it is. Like, it's one that I've noticed and I've seen. I've gotten quite a lot of comments that part of the reason I chose the terms kind, compassionate conversations in my emails, because I've had quite a few surprisingly rude and hostile messages and comments on social media in response to some of my posts. And all of my posts, especially at the beginning, were very, 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 very kind and very open minded. They're still kind and open minded, but they're very much um, a little bit more confidence behind them, I guess, or something like that. I'm not sure the way of naming the change, but um, I've noticed my social media hasn't got nearly as much reach as it used to. And I mean, not that I was a huge influencer or anything like that. I had a very, very tiny following, but I still got comments, and I still got some new folks, and a certain amount of views. And I'm not getting anywhere near that now. What does that mean? I'm going to change what I'm doing? Absolutely not, because I think that talking about these social justice issues and talking about what's happening in Palestine is far is so important. I don't want my business to negate its values to make money. Like, I don't want to sacrifice my values for profit. I'm not interested in a business or being any part of company that does not have does not follow its core values, or does not have values of standing up against oppression and standing up against genocide. Like, I don't want to be in a business that's going to be complacent with that. Um so just to like name that as well, that if I know that part might not necessarily be related to every single person listening to this, but just it might be to some of you that um I see you. Like, it is hard and it feels a little bit frustrating, especially if you, like me, social media is your main way of finding new people. But I would say, in all things, just keep coming back to your values. And if you don't have them like written out in a formal way, that's fine. Maybe you do that. I'm in the process of doing that right now, and it's kind of helpful to actually think about. Like, I know what my values are, but just to actually think about and put words to what that means is an interesting process. But keep coming back to your values and the things that you believe in, and have that be your core, like where you step out from, whether you're taking care of yourself or you're taking care of others, you're trying to make a decision in your business or in your job or whatever. Your values are important, and I don't think they're worth sacrificing. I don't think anything's worth sacrificing them. um and it's just normal. Like, it's not normal, but it's normal. You know what I mean? Like, the stuff what's happening in the world is not normal, but also your reactions are normal. Like, your feelings are valid, even if they feel confusing and you don't know what they are. Let me know if you have anything to add to this, because I think this is really, it's an important topic, and I honestly feel like I could keep on talking about it. It is interesting. I know I said this in the email, but when I was writing this, going through the process of trying to write other newsletters, I talk about like weight inclusivity all the time, and I talk about whatever my other topic was going to be. I forgot it already, but I talk about that all the time. Oh, congruency. I talk about that all the time. And I couldn't find any words to describe it. I couldn't find any words to talk about it. And they all felt shallow, even though they're not. Like, it's important topics, and I'm so excited to talk about them. But as soon as I started to actually just talk about what's actually going on, the confusing reality of what's actually happening, the words are just there. So I hope this helps you feel normalized, or just not like less alone. The other little disclaimer I forgot to give you at the beginning is that I have a bit of a cold, so my voice doesn't sound its normal. I don't know, but maybe it doesn't sound normal. um, but I mean, that's the reality. I did say, I guess, I was sick. Um, I'm resting. I'm trying. Do your best to take rest. Make sure you're drinking water, because I understand the urge to want to put everything into doing the social justice work. Actually, in an episode with Shannon Crow, we talked about needing to find the balance between taking care of yourself and then doing social justice work, because you literally can't keep doing it. You can't keep running on empty. You have to, at some point, take care of yourself. And just again, a reminder that your feelings are also important. It's not a contest. Don't make it a contest. Your feelings are valid. You're going through a hard time. And also, there are horrible things happening in the world that need our attention. So if you want to get newsletters from me, like that one that I shared with you today, check out the link in the show notes, and you can send me an email.
Thank you so much, Billie. This email helped me in the moment that I was in. I really felt like I was understood when I read it. Like I wasn't alone in trying to create content while also wanting to practice ahimsa and yoga by speaking up against harm. Connected yoga teachers, I want to share a small personal story. So this week, I actually had a reel go, I don't know, quote unquote, viral. And the backlash from that, or the comments that came in before I switched my comments to be a different setting, it was very shocking to me. Now, it's because this reel got pushed out way further than my regular content. You know, here on the podcast, you all have been listening to me as I learn to do better and learn more about how I can practice yoga off the mat. We've all been learning together. But this reel went out on Instagram, and the harm shared in some of the comments was unbelievable. So I actually had to switch my comments to be only people who follow me or who I follow, so that I could sleep and not worry about harm being posted when I was away from my phone. Now, I will say I was being a bit cheeky in the reel. I'll link to that reel in the show notes so you can have a watch if you haven't seen it. I was talking about how I was being called an extremist, woke liberal, for speaking up against the harm that's happening to Palestinians right now. And Billie said it so well. It is a risk to speak up. And what's interesting, what I wanted to share here, and I'm still kind of processing all of this, the comments that came in, like some of them were insulting me, most of them were insulting all Palestinians, which feels really bizarre to me because I don't think we can ever judge a population of people based on their location, their country. We can't judge citizens based on who they've voted for or who's leading them. And we definitely cannot judge people based on the extreme violence done by a small number of people in that population. So my logical brain could think through this, that when people were insulting me in the comments, or they were insulting Palestinians, there was also this weird thread where people were telling me just to mind my own business in my own country. And everyone who said that assumed I was from the US. That was really interesting as well, which I'm not. I'm from Canada. So all of that was happening, and I could just delete, block, go through the comments like that and take out any that were harmful. And it was hundreds of comments. And it did start to wear me out, the energy put toward it, thinking how can people talk about people like this, or say things like this, or name call like this? And we all know that there are internet trolls out there. So I know that exists, but actually something that felt more harmful in that moment and is still really upsetting for me is either the silence from people who have told me that they want peace, freedom, and equality for all people, but they do not want to say or do anything political. Or they tell me they just cannot watch the news right now. And to me, I got a message along those lines. I realized in that moment, wow, this feels harder to take, because it feels like if we all truly want peace and equality for humans, but we're afraid to speak up, and I get that, but at the same time, the flip side of that is that when we do that as a group, as a collective, we can make a huge difference together. We actually just did this yesterday in Canada. We made history over here. 26,000 Canadians sent emails asking that we stop sending weapons paid for by our taxes to Israel, and that we also recognize Palestine as a state and call for a ceasefire. And there were some other things in there. And there are details to this that, are still being worked out. The NDPs, that's one of our political parties here, put this forward. And individuals like you and me made it possible. All of the protests, all of the emails, all of the calls, all of the social media posts, our leaders and our politicians finally started listening in some way yesterday. The majority of them voted yes to this. And hopefully it means that there is less harm happening to people. And I guess I just want to say, there are also people who have reached out to me over the last few weeks and said, you know what, Shannon, this is making a difference. I called my MP or my leader, or I wrote an email, or I went to a protest, or I read a book, or I did this step, or I spoke out on social media. And I guess I want to say, when you show up like that, it makes such a difference. So on a week when I post a reel, it goes viral, and I'm just spending so much energy and time deleting harmful comments, if we divide that work amongst us and more of us are speaking out and using our platforms, it makes it easier. And if you're thinking, oh my gosh, Shannon, I don't want to post something because look at all the hate you got. Hey, there are lots of people who are learning how to do this in real time. I will be right there with you to support you. But there are also things that you can do, political actions that you can take in this moment right now that are not about posting on social media. So reach out if you're like, gosh, I want to be part of this collective movement of standing up against harm to people. I'd love to hear from you. All of the show notes for today's episode are over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/369. And we'd also love it if you leave a review for the podcast. And you can do that right from the show notes page as well. There's a button there. Look for it. Leave a review. If you'd like to leave me a voice message, I listen to those myself. There's a button on our homepage. If you head on over to theconnectedyogateacher.com, there's a button right there. If you have time to hang out in person, we have 3 things happening inside of Pelvic Health Professionals right now. So we're still doing the yoga series, Nourish Your Nervous System with Kathleen Pratt. And that goes until April the 9th with live classes. And then you can still access the replay for that. So there are 6 classes. It's amazing. My nervous system is loving it. I don't know if you can still hear in my voice, like I have had this cold, or maybe it's COVID, or whatever it is. I've had it for a month and a half now. So I was starting to think, maybe this is long COVID. I have a really barky cough. I try and keep that off the podcast right now. And we know from new research coming out in the last 4 years that with people who have had bouts of COVID, nourishing their nervous system can make a big difference. So I'm looking into that. If you know someone who is talking about lungs, COVID, or the nervous system and the connection to COVID, let me know, because I want to interview some people on the podcast about this. Okay, sorry. I was getting like a little excited and ahead of myself there. So if you want to do this 6-week online yoga series with us, that's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And then you can also get access to a call that we're doing this month in April, if you're listening in real time. Pelvic embodiment. Sherry Dostal-Ryba is coming in to talk to us about that. And then in May, we're having Brittany Sharp-McCollum back to talk to us about how we can support the pelvis during pregnancy. So if you are teaching prenatal yoga or wanting to teach prenatal yoga, check that out. Again, that's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Last note here, if you are a yoga teacher who is currently speaking up for Palestine, I want to make sure that we're connected. I know that you are putting your time and your energy out there, and I know that it might be pulling away from your business and your marketing. And so I want to see if I can help to amplify the work that you're doing. So reach out to me. Tag me on social media. I'm on Instagram at The Connected Yoga Teacher. I hang out there a lot. Also on Facebook, where you can tag me in the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. And I would just love to hear what you're putting together. Huge thank you to our entire team over here, Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead. Thank you all so much for the work that you do for the podcast and for our community. It means a lot. And thank you also, dear listener. You're here all the way to the end of today's episode, and it means a lot that you've spent this time to hang out. I would love to hear from you. If you have questions that you need answered on the podcast, let me know. And I'm going to close today out with a question for you. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community, so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?